Hello everyone, thank you for coming to class. This is another one of Mr. Whalen's wonderful video lectures. Today in class we're going to go over labor and we're going to go over wages. All this information can be found on page 280 of your textbook. So if you don't want to watch the entire video or if you just want to follow along in your textbook, here's where you can find all the information about labor and wages that we're going to go over today in class. Okay, you might think that this is your normal and average PowerPoint lecture, but it is not. It's going to be a super special PowerPoint presentation. And in this presentation, we are going to go over labor and some charts and some graphs and all this wonderful, really cool stuff. During this presentation, all I ask is that you copy down, wait, that's the bell. All I ask is that you copy down the charts and graphs and take notes and answer all of the questions on the handout or sheet of paper that I'm giving you, and I hope that you enjoy it. Okay, to begin, today in class we're going to talk about wages and we're going to talk about money and we're going to talk about labor, but we need to go over some vocabulary first. Okay, first things first is a wage, okay? And a wage usually is the amount of money you receive for an hour of work. Okay, when we talk about wages, we are actually going to talk about wages in dollars and how much you receive for an hour of work. Now, you could receive wages every month, or you could receive wages every 2 weeks, but in this particular situation, we're going to talk about wages per hour. If you could, please copy down this chart because we're going to examine it a little bit. On the left-hand side, you see some wages, and you see two different wage levels here, and these will correspond eventually to certain levels of demand. However, we're going to today talk about the demand for labor. Now, in the past, demand has come from consumers. However, in today's class, we're not talking about demand that comes from consumers. X that out. This type of demand does not come from consumers. We're talking about the demand for labor. And where do you think the demand for labor comes from? Well, this demand for labor comes from factories or businesses, or you could say in some ways households, if they demand certain, well, you could say handymen or repairs or something like that. But basically, most importantly, demand for labor comes from factories and businesses, okay? And the demand law states this. So there's going to be some rules that we have for the demand of labor. And it goes like this. At higher prices, or in this case, wages, the demand for labor will be less, or there will be a decrease in the demand for labor. Let's look at this. For example, let's say I own a Dairy Queen. Okay, and I'm going to start to pay my employees a certain amount of money. And at $4.20, or in this case it's 4.20 euros, because this is the graph that I found on the internet, I will want to hire 750 workers. Let's say this is a massive or huge Dairy Queen, or let's say that this is a Dairy Queen with many stores, okay, many different locations, more or less. Okay, I want to hire 750 employees or 750 workers because the cost of workers is really, really high. Remember, at higher prices or wages, demand for labor will be less. However, let's say that a bunch of individuals, a bunch of people, it's immigrants, what have you, come to Hangzhou or come to a certain country, and I decide, because there's so much labor, that I could actually pay my employees less money. And the wage rate drops from $4.20 or 4 euros to 3 euros, okay? Now this is really, really great because I can pay my workers less. Therefore, the demand for workers will increase from 750 to 1,000. If there was an issue or if there was a problem, or let's say there's just a lot of people and wages suddenly drop to €1, I could, in theory, hire for my business, my Dairy Queen empire, 1,500 individuals, okay? Now you could say this is really good. At higher prices, the demand for labor will be less, and at lower prices, or you could just say wages, in this, because it costs money to hire someone at lower wages, demand for labor will be higher, okay? Now, this looks like a pretty good situation for a producer. However, there is a problem. We're going to talk about the supply of labor, and the supply of labor is you as an individual. The supply of labor goes something like this. If the wage rate is really, really, really high, you could say, and your friends will go to work. You will say, hey, I will sell you my labor for money in exchange, okay? So if the wage rate is something like $4 or $5, you and your friends might say, hey, I'm going to go to work today. I'm going to find a job. However, if the wage rate decreases, you and your friends might not go to work. Or if the wage rate is too low, you might choose not to work. You might not agree with the wages. You might quit your job. You might get really angry. You might say, hey, I'm not going to accept these low wages. So your friends don't stop going to work. You stop going to work, and there's no supply of labor. And basically, if you want a rule to talk about the supply of labor, it goes like this. At higher wages, the supply of labor will increase, and at lower wages, the supply of labor will decrease. Okay, so it's the complete opposite of what we saw with the demand of labor. The supply of labor is you. However, and eventually, these two things come together, and there's going to be what we like to call, and please copy this down, an equilibrium wage rate, okay, where these two things come together and the number of workers needed equals the number of workers supplied for a certain price. It's basically, you could say, a happy point between the producer and the supplier, that's you, of labor. However, sometimes the government can intervene, okay, and this is what we like to call the minimum wage, okay, or it's the lowest wage legally allowed for 1 hour of work, okay, or it could be a law that is set into place by a government or sometimes by a state that says you need to pay your workers this amount of money. In the United States, if you ever go to college in the US or something like that, the federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. So if you work in a restaurant or but you wouldn't be working in a bar. If you work at a restaurant or a store or anything, you will receive this amount of money. Now, of course, there are higher wages depending on what you do as an individual, but for the most part, you as an individual will get at least $7.25, and if you're really, really intelligent or important, you could, or just have a really nice paying job, you can receive more money per hour. However, this is the big question. Is more money worth it? Now, there's two things you need to talk about when you look at wages and when you look at money. You need to look at inflation, and you also need to look at wages, okay? And in this particular graph, we can see increases in wages. For example, Australia, they're having an increase in wages. Wages are up, money is increasing. However, the consumer price is decreasing. Well, that's a good thing. That's a great thing. However, in places like the United States, again, wages are increasing, consumer price seems to be decreasing, but everyone is not so lucky. Consumer prices for things that you want to buy, for you could say food or supplies, in some countries is increasing. If we look at Italy, wages are increasing. However, the consumer prices on things are actually increasing more, leading to lots and lots of inflation for prices. If you look at a really interesting and rare case like Spain, you can see that wages have actually fallen, and to make a situation even worse, consumer prices have increased, leading to lots and lots of inflation and you could say bad economic times. Now, there's another thing that you should be aware of, and this is what we like to call a wage rate, okay? And I want you to pause the video right now and look at the wage rate. The thing that you should know about wage rates is that they can change. Sometimes wage rates of, you could say, dollars per hour, and this is 2000 and 2010, change for individuals. They will actually, depending on if you're maybe white or African American or a man or a woman, they can change. They change over time, as we can see in 2000 versus 2010. And we also see that they can change based upon your degree of education. And we'll talk about this in our class discussion, but you need to know that wages can adjust for people, and not all wages are the same. The amount of education, your race, your gender, all are included in your wage rate. However, how could you change your wage rate? This is a really good question. The more human capital you have, or the more, you could say, smarts that you have, what makes you skilled or special, this could be education or skill, and please copy down this chart, the higher your wages will be. Human capital includes knowledge, it includes skills and abilities, creativity, life experiences, and we're going to talk about human capital in class. But all I need you to do right now is copy down this particular chart. And the question you might ask is, what does human capital mean for wages? It seems that, in this particular chart, the longer you go to school, the higher your wages turn out to be. If you only have a 9th to 12th grade education over the course of your life or a year, or your job will not pay that much money. If you have some college, it gets better. If you have a master's degree, you tend to make a fair amount of money. A professional degree, you could say you almost make $100,000 a year. This would be considered an MBA. Or if you have a doctoral degree and work at, let's say, a university, you tend to make more and more money. So you could say that with more education, you will also see an increase in wages over your life. Now, I would like you to pause the video right now and look at this particular situation. This is a graph showing different levels of education. Again, this is just represented a little bit differently. And on this graph, we have unemployment rates, okay? So you get to see the amount of people who are unemployed. Also, you get to see what they make in a week. These numbers are weekly averages. You get to see what these individuals make in a week and the rate of unemployment for individuals who have only a high school education, some college, a master's degree, which is a fair amount of schooling, and a doctoral degree. So you get to see a correlation between what they make in a week, money, and the rate of unemployment. So not only do you have a job that pays well, but you also have a decreased risk of being unemployed when you have more and more education. Now, okay, that seems to be the end of the presentation. And therefore, I need you to answer the questions that I've given you in class, analyze the data that I've given you on your worksheet, and thank you very much for watching the video.